ASP.NET Page Life Cycle. The class system.web.ui.page has some important methods that we can override in order to add code at specific points in page life cycle. The diagram shows how these methods are related to page events and control events. Let's see the page lifecycle stages. The life cycle starts when a user requests a web page through his or her browser. The web server then processes the page through a sequence of steps before response is sent back to the user's browser. The steps are as: page request, start, page initialization, load, validation, post-back event handling, render, unload. The below figure shows the page life cycle of an ASP and its controls. First, the request comes from the user to browser. Then the browser forward request to the web server. Then the following stages are done at our application side. Finally, the return response is sent to the browser. Let's see the steps of lifecycle one by one. Page request. The page request occurs before the page lifecycle begins. When a user requests the page, ASP.NET determines whether the page needs to be parsed and compiled, or whether a cached version of the page can be sent in response without running the page. Start. In the start step, page properties such as request and response are set. At this stage, the page also determines whether the request is a postback or a new request, and sets the asPostback property. Additionally, during the start step, the page's UI culture property is set. Page initialization. During page initialization, controls on the page are available and each control's unique id are generated but not their properties. Any themes are also applied to the page. Developers have access to the init complete and preload methods in this stage. The methods are as follows. Init. This event is raised after all controls have been initialized, and any skin settings have been applied. This event is used to read or initialize control properties. Init complete. The page object raises this event. This event is used for processing tasks that require completion of all initialization. Preload. Use this event if you need to perform processing on your page or control before the load event. After the page raises this event, it loads view state for itself and all controls, and then processes any postback data included with the request instance. Load. During load, if the current request is a postback, control properties are loaded with information recovered from view state and control state. The onload event method is fired during this stage. This is where you will want to set properties for all of the server controls on your page, request query strings, and establish database connections. Validation. During validation, the validate method of all validator controls is called, which sets the isValid property of individual validator controls and of the page. Postback event handling. If the request is a postback, any event handlers are called. The event handling for server controls occurs during this stage. Render. During rendering, view state is saved to the page, and then the page calls on each control to contribute its rendered output to the output stream of the page's response property. Render is not really an event. The HTML of the page and all controls are sent to the browser for rendering. Unload. Unload is called when the page has been fully rendered, sent to the client, and is ready to be discarded. At this point, page properties such as response and request are unloaded and any cleanup is performed. The cleanup includes routines such as closing database connections and file streams, or event logging and other tasks. Conclusion. When a web page is requested, the server creates objects associated with the page and all of its child controls objects, and uses these to render the page to the browser. Once the final stage is complete, the web server destroys these objects to free up resource to handle additional requests. Page lifecycle events. When a page request is sent to the web server, the page is run through a series of events during its creation and disposal. Pre-init. The entry point of the page lifecycle is the pre-initialization phase called pre-init. This is the only event where programmatic access to master pages and themes is allowed. You can dynamically set the values of master pages and themes in this event. You can also dynamically create controls in this event. Example shows the override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Use this event for the following. Check the ASPostBack property to determine whether this is the first time the page is being processed. Create or recreate dynamic controls. Set a master page dynamically. Set the theme property dynamically. Init. This event fires after each control has been initialized, each control's unique ID is set, and any skin settings have been applied. You can use this event to change initialization values for controls. The init event is fired first for the most bottom control in the hierarchy, and then fired up the hierarchy until it is fired for the page itself. Example, override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. This event is raised after all controls have been initialized, and any skin settings have been applied. Use this event to read or initialize control properties. Init complete. Raise once all initializations of the page and its controls have been completed. Till now the viewState values are not yet loaded, hence you can use this event to make changes to viewState that you want to make sure are persisted after the next postback. Example, override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. This event is raised by the page object. Use this event for processing tasks that require all initialization be complete. Preload raised after the page loads viewState for itself and all controls, and after it processes postback data that is included with the request instance loads viewState. ViewState data are loaded to controls. Note, the page viewState is managed by ASP.NET and is used to persist information over a page round trip to the server. ViewState information is saved as a string of name-value pairs and contains information such as control text or value. The viewState is held in the value property of a hidden input control that is passed from page request to page request. Loads postback data. Postback data are now handed to the page controls. Note, during this phase of the page creation, form data that was posted to the server termed is processed against each control that requires it. Hence, the page fires the load post data event and parses through the page to find each control and updates the control state with the correct postback data. ASP.NET updates the correct control by matching the control's unique ID with the name-value pair in the name-value collection. This is one reason that ASP.NET requires unique ID for each control on any given page. Example, override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Use this event if you need to perform processing on your page or control before the load event. Before the page instance raises this event, it loads viewState for itself and all controls, and then processes any postback data included with the request instance. Load. The important thing to note about this event is the fact that by now, the page has been restored to its previous state in case of postbacks. Code inside the page load event typically checks for postback and then sets control properties appropriately. This method is typically used for most code, since this is the first place in the page lifecycle that all values are restored. Most code checks the value of its postback to avoid unnecessarily resetting state. You may also wish to call validate and check the value of is valid in this method. You can also create dynamic controls in this method. Example, override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. The page calls to the onload event method on the page, then recursively does the same for each child control, which does the same for each of its child controls until the page and all controls are loaded. Use the onLoadEvent method to set properties and controls and establish database connections. Control postback events. ASP.NET now calls any events on the page or its controls that cause the postback to occur. This might be a buttons click event or drop-down selected index change event, for example. These are the events, the code for which is written in your code behind class CS file. Example. Override the event, as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. This is just an example of control event. Here it is button click event that caused the postback. Load complete. This event signals the end of load. Example. Override the event, as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Use this event for tasks that require that all other controls on the page be loaded. Pre-render. Allows final changes to the page or its control. This event takes place after all regular postback events have taken place. This event takes place before saving view state, so any changes made here are saved. For example, after this event, you cannot change any property of a button or change any view state value. Because, after this event, save state complete and render events are called. Example. Override the event, as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Each data-bound control, whose data source ID property is set, calls its data-bind method. The pre-render event occurs for each control on the page. Use the event to make final changes to the contents of the page or its controls. Save state complete. Prior to this event, the view state for the page and its controls is set. Any changes to the page's controls at this point or beyond are ignored. Example. Override the event, as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Before this event occurs, view state has been saved for the page and for all controls. Any changes to the page or controls at this point will be ignored. Use this event to perform tasks that require view state to be saved, but that do not make any changes to controls. Render. This is a method of the page object and its controls. At this point, ASP.NET calls this method on each of the page's controls to get its output. The render method generates the client-side HTML, dynamic hypertext markup language (DHTML), and script that are necessary to properly display a control at the browser. Note, right-click on the web page displayed at client's browser, and view the page's source. You will not find any ASPX server control in the code. Because all ASPX controls are converted to their respective HTML representation. Browser is capable of displaying HTML and client-side scripts. Example. Override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. Render stage goes here. This is not an event unload. This event is used for cleanup code. After the page's HTML is rendered, the objects are disposed of. During this event, you should destroy any objects or references you have created in building the page. At this point, all processing has occurred and it is safe to dispose of any remaining objects, including the page object. Cleanup can be performed on instances of classes, that is objects, closing open files, closing database connections. Example. Override the event as given below in your code behind CS file of your ASPX page. This event occurs for each control and then for the page. In controls, use this event to do final cleanup for specific controls, such as closing control-specific database connections. During the unload stage, the page and its controls have been rendered, so you cannot make further changes to the response stream. If you attempt to call a method such as the response write method, the page will throw an exception. Thank you. And next we will see the controls in ASP.